room settles into a soft, unhurried quiet, the kind that seems to thicken the air just enough to feel like a blanket. A small flame flickers on a low wooden table, throwing a warm, amber glow onto stacks of paper that have long since turned the color of old tea. The light moves slowly, almost lazily, as though it too is ready to lie down for the night. Nothing in the room is in a hurry. Even the dust floats as if it has no particular destination. Against this still backdrop rests a manuscript, thick, uneven, bound together by a spine that has survived more centuries than anyone can confidently count. The cover creaks softly when lifted, offering a kind of greeting, or perhaps a complaint. Ancient books always sound a little grumpy on the outside, even though they hold entire worlds inside. The first page opens with the gentle rasp of textured parchment, the surface patterned with tiny imperfections that look like the skin of time itself. Ink strokes fade unevenly across the page, forming lines of symbols and shapes whose meaning has been lost to silence. Each curl, dot, and sweeping line sits with the self-assurance of something that once mattered greatly, even if no one alive today can quite remember why. It's a funny thing. Humans have built cities, crossed oceans, split atoms, and launched satellites. Yet here lies a book whose author might as well have encrypted the entire universe. And to make matters worse, they didn't leave instructions. No key, no notes, not even a good luck deciphering this scribbled in the margins. Nothing. Just quiet, confident mystery. For thousands of years, civilizations recorded their knowledge not in the open, but wrapped in layers of coded symbols, hidden alphabets, and scripts designed to hide more than they revealed. Knowledge was precious, sometimes dangerous, and occasionally so powerful that it needed to be tucked away like a secret kept between generations. Books like the one lying open on the table were less like ordinary texts and more like vaults. Some were written in languages that faded along with the cultures that created them. Others were encoded deliberately, crafted so only the initiated could understand the true message beneath the visible lines. Some scribes were scholars, some mystics, some political strategists. A few were very likely over-caffeinated monks with too much time and too few hobbies. These ancient manuscripts weren't simply written, they were constructed, layer by layer, symbol by symbol, like puzzles meant for a future that might never arrive. Tonight, the room becomes an entry point into that long corridor of lost knowledge. The soft glow spreads over the open pages, illuminating the delicate scripts that curve like quiet rivers across the parchment. The ink doesn't shout, it whispers. Even though no one understands it anymore, it still manages to hold a certain presence, as though confident that mystery alone is worth preserving. There is no rush to interpret anything, no urgency, just the slow, settling awareness that this book has waited centuries. It can certainly wait a few more minutes. The deeper idea behind these old, unreadable texts is simple. Humans have always tried to safeguard what they considered valuable. Empires used encrypted letters to secure alliances. Healers encoded herbal remedies to keep them from being misused. Secret societies, yes, the dramatic kind with hoods and torches, cloaked their teachings in symbols accessible only to members. And sometimes, scribes created wholly new alphabets just because the existing ones felt too ordinary. Knowledge traveled through history not as a direct line, but as a series of locked doors. Behind each door lies another world, another story, another understanding of existence. Some doors opened naturally, others stayed tightly sealed. Many never opened at all. The manuscript resting on the table is a survivor of those sealed doors. Whatever purpose it once served, scientific, spiritual, medicinal, or entirely whimsical, it now exists mainly as a quiet reminder that human curiosity stretches farther than understanding can follow. It invites attention without expectation, offering mystery without pressure. Above the book, the flame flickers again, this time in a softer rhythm. Shadows drift across the walls, forming shapes that look almost like moving script. The room feels dimmer, calmer, as though preparing itself for the long journey ahead. A journey not through action or drama, but through gentle exploration. A slow walk through the corridors of ancient knowledge, where even unanswered questions feel soothing. As the pages rest open, the night deepens. And somewhere within the stillness, the long sleeping codes of the ancient world seem to exhale, as if relieved to be witnessed again. This is where the story begins, quietly, patiently, at the threshold of forgotten wisdom that has waited centuries for someone to simply sit with it. Long before modern people argued over whether their Wi-Fi password should include one symbol, two numbers, and the emotional weight of their childhood trauma, ancient civilizations had already developed their own systems of protection. Their encryption was quieter, slower, and humbler, but also far more elegant. In the centuries before sticky notes existed, before anyone could write down password 123 and hope no one would notice, the world was full of knowledge that needed guarding. And so, without fanfare, humans learned to hide what mattered most. It began with simple marks, a curl here, a notch there, a symbol that looked familiar but somehow wasn't. Ancient scribes discovered that the easiest way to keep important information safe was not to build walls around it, but to transform the very shape of the information itself. Instead of shouting meaning into the world, they whispered it into coded lines. They learned early that if a message looked confusing enough, most people would simply walk away and find something else to worry about, which honestly still works today. Knowledge in those early societies was more than a collection of facts. It was an inheritance. It carried the weight of survival, power, and identity. A herbal remedy written too clearly could be stolen. A political plan laid out plainly could be intercepted. A spiritual teaching explained too openly might be misunderstood. And so symbols became guardians. They protected not just what was written, but the communities that depended on those writings. Healers sometimes recorded their recipes in strange diagrams and spirals. Mixtures of leaves, roots, and rituals, represented by symbols that looked like the menu of a restaurant no one could find. To the untrained eye, these recordings might resemble the notes of someone who tried to write while falling asleep. But to the right apprentice, they were the difference between sickness and health. These coded systems created a quiet boundary between those initiated and those simply curious. Officials and generals used encoded alphabets for diplomatic messages. Instead of sending letters that said, "Attack at dawn," they wrote lines of symbols that looked like a bird trying to dance across the page. If the enemy intercepted the message, they would be left staring at shapes as meaningful as grains of sand. Historians today study such documents with admiration. Enemies in the past likely studied them with concern. The scribes themselves probably enjoyed a moment of private satisfaction each time they finished a particularly complicated section. In those early centuries, encoding wasn't merely a method of protection, It was a form of craftsmanship. Each mark was placed with care. Each stroke mattered. A single misplaced dot could change the entire meaning. This is why some ancient encoded documents now puzzle modern researchers so thoroughly. A scribe sitting in a dim room 900 years ago may have sneezed at the wrong moment, and what was once a perfectly clear instruction has now turned into a mystery that no one can solve. Still, the intention behind these systems was not to create frustration for future generations, even if it sometimes feels that way. The scribes believed that important knowledge deserved important protection. They didn't have safes, encryption software, or locked cabinets. What they had was ink, imagination, and a strong desire to make sure the wrong person wouldn't casually read their work. So they shielded their ideas in layers of symbols and structures so subtle that only patient minds could unravel them. And because many ancient civilizations understood the fragility of memory, they encoded not for secrecy alone, but for endurance. Empires fell, cities burned, languages shifted, and traditions disappeared. But the encoded symbols survived. Their symmetry, their repetition, and their deliberate strangeness allowed them to outlive the environments that created them. They became time travelers in the form of ink and clay. In some sense, these symbols were like doors, not slammed shut, but gently closed. Anyone who wished to enter could try. Many would give up, a few would persist, and the ones who persisted would prove themselves worthy of understanding the message on the other side. With such a structure, even if a text slipped from the hands of its intended audience, it remained protected by difficulty alone. This approach turned many ancient documents into quiet puzzles. They didn't beg to be solved. They simply existed, waiting calmly for someone with enough curiosity to sit beside them. Today, these encoded manuscripts offer the same stillness. Researchers study them under bright lights and advanced equipment, yet the manuscripts maintain their composure. They never hurry to reveal their secrets. They never protest the attention. They simply hold their place in history with the quiet confidence of something that knows its value. To imagine how these documents were created, picture a small room lit by a single flame. Ink rests in a bowl. A scribe sits at a wooden table leaning over a sheet of treated parchment. Outside, the world is lively, markets, animals, the movement of daily life. But inside this room, only the slow rhythm of the brush exists. Each line drawn must match the last. Each symbol must look just right. And somewhere, without the scribe realizing it, an entire code is taking shape. The scribe doesn't need to rush. Knowledge is not going anywhere. The parchment absorbs each stroke like it is storing a heartbeat, and gradually the page fills with symbols that look simple but hold a depth only those trained in the system can understand. If someone from the future were to enter this room, blinking at the candlelight and squinting at the page, they might wonder whether the scribe was recording great wisdom or simply decorating the parchment for fun. The truth, of course, lies somewhere in between. Ancient scribes believed in beauty as much as they believed in protection. This combination allowed encoded knowledge to survive across thousands of years. Even when cultures fell silent, their symbols continued whispering. They whispered through cracks in clay tablets. They whispered through faded ink on fragile paper. They whispered through carvings worn by sand and wind. And today, when people examine these markings, the whisper continues. Knowledge, once treasured, never disappears completely. It simply changes shape. Ancient encryption was not about hiding everything forever. It was about allowing wisdom to rest safely until the right eyes, hands, and minds approached it with patience. It was a gentle kind of secrecy, one that protected without isolation, one that preserved without pride. And so, these cryptic marks remain as soft reminders that long before the modern world digitized its secrets, humans already understood something essential. Sometimes, the best way to protect what matters is simply to make it beautifully difficult to read. Secret alphabets have a particular charm. They sit quietly on old pages with the confidence of something that knows exactly what it is, while politely pretending to be something else entirely. One glance at an encoded script, like Alphabetum Caldeorum, and the mind hesitates. The characters look almost familiar, as though they have attended the same family gatherings as Latin letters, but chose to arrive wearing elaborate disguises. They resemble distant cousins who share the same bone structure, but have dramatically different fashion choices. It is an intentional confusion, designed precisely to fool the uninvited observer. These alphabets were not accidents. They were crafted with purpose, shaped by hands that understood the delicate art of hiding meaning in plain sight. To untrained eyes, the written lines resemble symbols casually taking a vacation together, resting, stretching, and forming shapes that appear meaningful only to themselves. But to those initiated into the code, the same symbols transform instantly into coherent messages. A simple curve becomes a directive. A small hook becomes a name. A sequence of ornate marks becomes an entire instruction. Behind these mysterious alphabets lies a world of quiet labor. Imagine a small room lit not by bright bulbs, but by the warm, trembling glow of oil lamps or candles. The light flickers, gently settling into the wooden walls, and the faint scent of ink. Sheets of parchment made from treated animal skin rest patiently on the desk, cool and slightly textured. The tools of the scribe, brushes, quills, sharpened reeds, lie arranged with care, ready to trace the next line of protected knowledge. In this setting, time does not rush. It drifts, soft and steady, like dust falling through a beam of light. The only sound that truly matters is the delicate touch of ink meeting parchment, an almost rhythmic whisper that fills the space. Scribes sit for hours in still, disciplined postures, copying line after line with a dedication modern people usually reserve for finishing a long TV series in one night. Their work was not only transcription, it was a ritual, a quiet collaboration between mind, hand, and history. Creating a cryptographic alphabet was not something that could be done casually. It required a hand steady enough to keep every symbol consistent, and a mind patient enough to follow rules that allowed no shortcuts. Each mark carried weight. A single curve drawn too wide or too narrow could alter meaning entirely. A dot, slightly misplaced, could confuse the code for centuries. And indeed, some of the confusion modern researchers face may be nothing more than the legacy of someone in the 11th century sneezing at the wrong moment. But even with these imperfections, the alphabets remained beautifully intact. Every stroke the scribes placed was a small act of protection. The symbols became guardians, quiet shields that stood between outsiders and the knowledge within. The scribes understood that writing was not merely a way to record information, it was a way to filter it. What was written plainly was accessible to all. What was written in secret alphabet was reserved for those who had earned the right to understand. These scriptoriums, the rooms where such alphabets were shaped, were sanctuaries of concentration. The atmosphere inside them felt almost suspended, as though sound itself walked more slowly within the walls. Outside, the world might have been full of noise, chatter, or movement. But inside, the focus was absolute. If anything broke the silence, it might be the faint creak of a chair, or the soft sigh of someone stretching their fingers, or the light clink of ink pots shifting on the desk. The scribes themselves became keepers of rhythm. Their brushstrokes were calm, deliberate, and oddly comforting. Watching them work would have been like observing someone weave threads into a fabric so detailed that only they understood the pattern. The symbols flowed from their hands with a consistency that bordered on meditative. And in the slow passage of hours, an entire encoded document would emerge, quietly, steadily, as though the room itself was creating it. These alphabets did more than conceal information. They also shaped identity. They created invisible circles, those who understood and those who did not. For the trained, every symbol held purpose. For the untrained, the same symbol could be misinterpreted as decorative art or random scribbling. This distinction was powerful. It made knowledge selective. It made understanding a privilege earned through study rather than stumbled upon accidentally. Yet, despite their secrecy, the alphabets were never hostile. They were not meant to mock the uninitiated or challenge them aggressively. They were gentle labyrinths, complex enough to require guidance, but not cruel enough to be impossible. They carried a quiet etiquette. If you wish to understand, walk slowly and learn with care. And those who followed this path often experienced a deeper appreciation for the knowledge they unlocked. Because of these encoded alphabets, ancient knowledge passed safely from one generation to the next. It survived not because it was shouted loudly, but because it was whispered softly. Wars burned cities, but the symbols endured. Floods washed away buildings, but the coded texts remained tucked away in stone walls, clay jars, or wooden chests. Time weathered civilizations, yet the secret alphabets kept their composure with the calm assurance of things designed to last. Even today, scholars studying these scripts often find themselves drifting into the same quiet atmosphere that once filled those old rooms. They sit in bright labs or modern libraries, yet the spirit of the ancient scriptorium lingers. The shapes of the letters seem to soften the noise around them. The patterns, though puzzling, create a feeling of gentle curiosity, and the silence inside the symbols still feels intentional, as if carrying the old message. Understanding takes time. Do not rush. These alphabets remind us that knowledge is not always meant to be accessed instantly. Some wisdom prefers to unfold slowly, like a story told beside a fading fire. Some truths need to be read, not with the eyes alone, but with patience. And some messages were crafted not for the world at large, but for those willing to sit in a quiet room, listening to the soft scratch of ink traveling across parchment. In their stillness, in their secrecy, and in the delicate spaces between their strokes, these ancient alphabets hold a lesson of their own, one that speaks softly across centuries. Sometimes the most meaningful understanding comes to those who move through knowledge gently, one careful symbol at a time. Among all the mysterious manuscripts drifting through the long corridors of history, the Voynich Manuscript stands like a quiet, well-composed stranger, polite, elegant, and deeply confusing. It gives the impression of something handcrafted with immense care, yet determined not to explain itself. Dating back to the 15th century, the book carries the confidence of an object that has survived wars, migrations, climates, collectors, and countless puzzled scholars, all while saying absolutely nothing about what it means. The moment one opens a random page, a strange calm settles in. The handwriting is the first thing that captures attention, long before the symbols themselves begin to whisper their unknown patterns. The script flows across the parchment in steady, flowing lines, so uniform that it looks as though whoever wrote it had access to a medieval version of a laser printer, equipped with emotional stability. Each letter sits neatly beside its neighbor. Each line holds its own weight, neither tilting upward nor drooping downward. Even modern calligraphers, with ergonomic pens, adjustable chairs, and good lighting, often stare at the manuscript and whisper, "How did anyone achieve this consistency without electricity or caffeine?" But admiration quickly dissolves into confusion. The perfectly arranged script does not resemble Latin. It is not Greek. It is not Hebrew. It shares nothing with Arabic, Cyrillic, Sanskrit, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Mayan glyphs, or any known writing system on Earth. The symbols hint at familiar shapes, teasing the mind the way a word resting at the tip of one's tongue refuses to surface. They curve like letters, deciding whether they want to join a real alphabet, then hesitate, then change their minds entirely. The script behaves like something trying very hard to blend in with human languages while quietly refusing to follow any of their rules. And just when the observer begins to think, perhaps the writing will make sense later, the illustrations appear. Earnest, lively, and increasingly bewildering. The plants depicted in the manuscript are works of botanical imagination at its most playful. Some resemble spinach, drawn by someone who has never seen spinach but has heard elaborate rumors about it. Others look like hybrids between a lotus flower, a fern, and a vegetable that may or may not exist in another galaxy. A few plants twist, curl, or sprawl dramatically across the page, as though posing for a portrait session conducted by an artist with a charming disregard for botanical accuracy. Certain pages appear so chaotic that one could easily believe the manuscript had once fallen off a desk, flipped open onto a random page, and the scribes collectively agreed, "Yes, this looks correct," and continued working from there. Then there are the astronomical diagrams, circles within circles, loops intersecting loops, symbols orbiting other symbols. The diagrams evoke the vibe of a medieval astronomer trying to map the cosmos after hearing a verbal explanation from someone who only partially understood what they were describing. The result is beautiful, symmetrical, and wholly uncooperative with human attempts to parse it. Many diagrams resemble star charts, though none align with known celestial systems. Some commentators have joked that the author attempted to draw the universe and simply forgot to include a "you are here" marker. Yet the most iconic and bewildering illustrations are the small figures of women, delicate, nude, and often depicted lounging in pools of green or blue liquid. The pools are connected by long, winding tubes that twist across the pages like waterways from a whimsical, medieval plumbing blueprint. These women appear relaxed, unconcerned, happily immersed in their swirling baths. Whether they are performing rituals, undergoing treatments, or enjoying a spa day from the 15th century remains unknown. No caption explains their presence. The manuscript offers no clues, no context, and certainly no apology for leaving everyone profoundly confused. Some pages contain what appear to be entire systems of interconnected pipes, guiding streams of liquid from one tub to another. The whole scene feels slightly conspiratorial, as though the women are participating in a secret project involving early hydrotherapy. Or perhaps the manuscript's creator simply enjoyed drawing pipes and baths more than drawing coherent annotations. Viewed in its entirety, the manuscript radiates a peculiar energy, like a very organized person who refuses to tell anyone what they've organized. Each page suggests meaning but avoids delivering it. Each diagram begins confidently, then veers abruptly into unexplored strangeness. Every plant seems realistic until it doesn't. Every line of text imitates linguistic structure until it mischievously breaks all known linguistic rules. This delicate balance between order and absurdity is what gives the Voynich Manuscript its irresistible charm. It appears logical, unquestionably so, yet provides no evidence of logic. It looks knowledgeable but refuses to provide knowledge. It is persuasive in its neatness, but uncooperative in its purpose. It behaves like a book that wants to be taken seriously, but also wants to enjoy watching people attempt to decode it for centuries without success. Cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians, historians, AI systems, pattern recognition algorithms, and countless independent researchers have all dedicated time, energy, and a significant number of headaches to this manuscript. It has been statistically analyzed, scanned with multispectral imaging, digitized, compared, decoded, redecoded, and triple decoded. Yet despite all this, the book remains serenely unreadable. It deflects interpretation with a politeness that borders on comedic. It gives nothing away. No matter how deeply one scrutinizes its lines, the manuscript responds with the same unbothered silence, as though gently patting humanity on the back and saying, "Good effort." The more one contemplates the handwriting, the more suspicious it becomes. The consistency is almost unnatural. Every letter holds its form as though the scribe practiced each symbol 100 times before committing it to the page. Even the spacing between words, if they are indeed words, is precise and measured. There are no visible corrections, no smudges, no signs of hesitation. Either the scribe was extraordinarily skilled, or they possessed a level of concentration only achievable by someone who had reached a transcendent state of calm. Some scholars have speculated that the manuscript might have been written using a cipher, but if this is the case, it is a cipher of extraordinary dedication. Unlike typical coded writing, which often reveals patterns or structural hints, the Voynich script adheres to none. It flows like natural language, but not quite naturally. It repeats like human speech, but without forming decipherable units. It drifts between consistency and randomness with an elegance that seems deliberate. As a result, the manuscript feels alive in a strange, quiet way, almost playful, as though enjoying its centuries-long role as history's most graceful unsolved puzzle. It gives the impression that if the book could speak, it might look at the scholars surrounding it and say, "You've come a long way, but not far enough." Despite all confusion, the manuscript never feels threatening or chaotic. On the contrary, it exudes a gentle, soothing presence. The curves of the letters are soft. The illustrations, even in their oddness, carry a calm rhythm. The pages offer mystery without urgency, complexity without distress. One can stare at them for hours and feel neither frustration nor pressure, only the soft drift of curiosity, like a slow current, guiding the mind into a dreamlike state. The Voynich Manuscript is a paradox, wrapped in parchment. It is at once structured and nonsensical, familiar and alien, intentional and indecipherable. It is a book that behaves like it desperately contains meaning, yet seems perfectly content never to reveal that meaning. Observing it is like listening to someone whisper in a language that almost sounds known, a lullaby from another world, soothing and impossible at the same time. In the end, the manuscript remains one of history's most unintentionally comedic masterpieces. It does not mock. It does not resist. It simply exists with serene indifference, like a cat sitting in the middle of a room without explaining why. Humanity continues to circle around it, trying to understand, and the book, resting quietly on its centuries-old pages, continues to be what it has always been: beautifully confusing, wonderfully composed, and suspiciously well organized. A mystery that never raises its voice. A puzzle that never demands to be solved. A silent companion to the patient, the curious, and the half asleep. For more than a century, scholars from every imaginable discipline have gathered, sometimes literally, sometimes through long-distance academic sighs, to attempt a full decoding of the Voynich Manuscript. Linguists, cryptographers, historians, mathematicians, botanists, astronomers, statisticians, code breakers from old War departments, computer scientists, and most recently, machine learning models that claim they can decode anything except family expectations. All have taken turns staring at these pages. And yet, after all this effort, all this computing power, all this collective human determination, the manuscript remains as serene as a sleeping cat, calm, silent, unmoved. It has witnessed empires fall and rise, technologies evolve. Scholars debate loudly, and yet it has not revealed even one unambiguous word, not a single sentence, not one verified phrase. Nothing. Every attempt slides off its surface like water rolling down polished stone. The more modern the technology used, the quieter the manuscript seems to become, as if politely refusing to participate in whatever linguistic gymnastics humanity attempts. When statisticians run patterns across its symbols, the symbols respond with unwavering consistency, giving just enough structure to seem meaningful but never enough to be solved. When cryptographers apply every known cipher, the writing resists gently, like a puzzle that doesn't mind being attempted but has zero intention of being solved. When linguists try to match the symbol frequency to natural languages, the results float somewhere between almost plausible and absolutely nothing, like the manuscript is teasing them with the vaguest resemblance of linguistic behavior. In the age of artificial intelligence, researchers fed high-resolution images of the manuscript into models designed to detect hidden patterns. These models can classify galaxies, recognize faces, finish sentences, predict weather, and sort pictures of cats by facial expression. Yet when confronted with the Voynich Manuscript, they blink, digitally but still very perceptibly, and return results like possible structure detected, meaning unknown, or the script behaves like language. Unfortunately, it does not behave like any language we know, or the classic, scholarly version of giving up, insufficient context. It is almost charming how unwaveringly consistent the manuscript is in refusing to cooperate. It does not resist aggressively. It simply does not respond at all. It sits with the quiet dignity of an object that has survived hundreds of winters and does not feel compelled to explain itself to anyone. One can imagine the book offering a gentle, paper-thin smile whenever someone new announces, confidently, "This time we'll finally decode it." This silence, ancient, patient, unbothered, has created a vast landscape of hypotheses. Some are serious, grounded in decades of research. Others are speculative, fueled by fascination. A few are whimsical, made by people who looked at one too many pages at 3 a.m. But in their own way, each theory adds to the quiet humor surrounding this manuscript. The humor of humanity trying desperately to understand something that feels no urgency to be understood. One of the most respectable theories is that the manuscript represents a lost language, something once spoken by a small community or tribe whose cultural memory faded long before widespread documentation began. If this is true, then the Voynich Manuscript is the last surviving witness of that community's existence, the sole remnant of a linguistic tradition erased by time. Scholars approach this possibility with reverence, knowing that losing a language is like losing a worldview. But the manuscript, silent and unhelpful, offers no confirmation, no clue, no hint, only the same elegant symbols repeating across its pages as if whispering, "Perhaps, perhaps not." Another theory suggests the manuscript is written in a constructed language, a system intentionally built by an individual or a small group. Such a language could be a personal project, a secret mode of communication, or even an artistic experiment. But if this theory is correct, it leads to a humorous realization. Someone, 5 or 6 centuries ago, invented an entire alphabet, complete with its own grammar and structure, used it to fill hundreds of pages, and then didn't explain it to anyone. It would be the medieval equivalent of creating a 50-character password, not writing it down anywhere, and then confidently expecting future generations to guess it correctly. Then there is the multi-layer encryption theory, the possibility that the manuscript contains several levels of encoded meaning. Perhaps the visible symbols are not the actual letters, but the surface layer of a more complex system, one that requires stripping away layers of substitution, transformation, inversion, and rearrangement before the real message is revealed. Some imagine the book like an onion made of ink. Peel one layer and another appears, equally firm, equally resistant, equally mysterious. If this theory is true, then solving the Voynich manuscript may require decoding not just one cipher, but several, like unlocking a door only to discover another door, and another, until finally discovering you are actually standing at the entrance again. And there is, of course, the charmingly mischievous theory the manuscript might be a work of art without literal meaning, a visual poem, a meditative exercise, a playful experiment, a collection of beautiful shapes designed to evoke curiosity, not answers. If this theory holds, then the manuscript is possibly the most successful art piece ever created, having captured the curiosity of scholars, historians, scientists, and dreamers for more than 600 years. It would be the ultimate long-running joke, subtle and elegant, one that the author set in motion centuries ago, confident that future generations would puzzle over it indefinitely. Yet regardless of which theory is closest to the truth, the manuscript remains entirely consistent in its demeanor. It is calm. It is composed. It is almost serene in its refusal to disclose its purpose. It feels as though it has grown accustomed to being surrounded by earnest researchers with intense expressions. At this point, the presence of scholars might even feel like familiar company. It does not hurry, it does not protest. It simply lies open page after page with its soft ink strokes and its endless repetitions, letting humanity try as long as it wishes. And perhaps that is why the manuscript stands out so uniquely among ancient relics. It does not need to be deciphered to be valuable. Its significance does not come from what it says, but from what it holds. A presence, a mood, a quiet defiance against the world's insistence on answers. It exists as a kind of silent melody, a long, gentle, continuous tone that drifts through history like a lullaby, made of symbols instead of sound. In a modern world obsessed with speed, clarity, efficiency, and immediate explanations, the Voynich Manuscript leans back comfortably and whispers in its 1,000-year-old silence, "Slow down. Not all mysteries exist to be solved." This subtle message feels strangely comforting. There is no pressure to decode the book, no rush, no urgency. The manuscript seems content to remain as it is, a riddle wrapped in beauty, wrapped in patience, wrapped in the soft hum of centuries passing. It asks nothing. It demands nothing. It simply invites the viewer to sit quietly with it, to absorb its gentle strangeness, to admire the craftsmanship of its unknown alphabet, to let the imagination drift. If the book were a person, it might be the calm one at a party, the quiet observer in the corner who says very little but somehow becomes the most interesting presence in the room. People approach, hoping for insight. The book smiles politely, or the paper equivalent of smiling politely. People leave with more questions than they arrived with, and the book continues sitting there, content in its role as the enigmatic guest that everyone grows more fascinated with over time. Many who study it find themselves lulled not into frustration but into a contemplative state. There is something meditative about analyzing patterns that refuse to resolve, something soothing about knowing that a mystery can exist without demanding to be conquered, something peaceful in recognizing that not all knowledge must be extracted. Some knowledge can simply be witnessed. The Voynich Manuscript teaches quietly and without trying that ambiguity can be gentle, that unanswered questions can be restful, that the world contains wonders that do not require solutions to be beautiful. Sometimes the book seems to breathe with the soft rhythm of age. The ink rests lightly on the parchment. The symbols stand like tiny guardians at their posts. The illustrations, odd as they are, feel almost dreamlike. Everything about the manuscript radiates a patience that modern life rarely encourages. And perhaps that is why people keep returning to it, not out of desperation to decode it, but out of a strange affection for its refusal to be decoded. It feels like a small piece of the universe reminding us that mystery, in its gentlest form, is not an obstacle, but a place to rest, a puzzle that never pressures, a challenge that never insists, a secret that never shouts. Just a quiet smile made of ink, drifting across 6 centuries. The Rohonc Codex enters the stage of history the way a mysterious guest enters a quiet room, softly, unannounced, and with a look of calm confidence that suggests it knows far more than it intends to reveal. Discovered in Hungary, though no one knows exactly where or how, the manuscript carries an air of deliberate secrecy. It is not a large book. It is not extravagant. But it sits with a subtle presence, like an object fully aware that it contains something perplexing inside its pages. Open it, and the first impression that rises is a gentle, bewildered breath. Inside are more than 200 unique symbols, carefully drawn in ink, arranged in rows that seem almost, but not quite, linguistic. At a passing glance, one might think, a script of some kind. But the moment the eyes linger a second longer, the sense of familiarity dissolves. The symbols look like letters attempting to imitate what letters should be, but drifting off course, just enough to remain illegible forever. It's as if someone once decided to invent a new writing system, but skipped the part where writing systems need rules, structure, or consistency. The symbols repeat in patterns that hint at meaning but refuse to settle into recognizable rhythms. Some characters appear frequently, others sparingly, and none seem to obey any known linguistic principles. Frequency patterns look promising until they don't. Word lengths feel consistent until they suddenly stretch, contract, or shift midline. The entire script looks like it wants to be understood, but also enjoys watching the observer frown in slow confusion. And yet the writing itself is neat, deliberate, calm. There is no frantic energy, no messy hesitation, no ink blotches that might suggest uncertainty. Whoever wrote the Codex worked with quiet steadiness, as though following a plan invisible to everyone else. Even when the symbols bend oddly or gather in suspicious clusters, the stroke of the pen remains smooth, suggesting purpose, intent, and perhaps a bit of smugness from the manuscript. Then come the illustrations, tiny drawings scattered throughout the book like miniature windows into scenes that appear familiar but quickly dissolve into ambiguity. Some pages show what might be religious rituals, groups of figures standing beneath symbols that resemble stars, flames, or heraldic markings. Other illustrations depict armies so small they look like toy soldiers marching in perfect formation. Tiny banners wave above them, though their designs are too small and too cryptic to identify. Some figures wear hats that might be ceremonial or military, or simply stylistic choices from a fashion sense lost to time. There are battles, but no clear victors, ceremonies, but no clear deities, processions, but no clear destination. It is all intricate and miniature, delicately rendered with lines so fine they seem in danger of fading if the page is breathed on too heavily. Looking at these scenes, one cannot help but feel that the manuscript is intentionally withholding its story. The illustrations provide context, but only enough to deepen the questions. Each image is a clue, but one placed at a mischievous distance, always slightly out of reach. The book feels like it knows exactly what it wants to say, but prefers instead to let future generations debate endlessly. One of the most charming mysteries surrounding the Codex is its writing direction. Scholars have attempted to determine whether the text is meant to be read from left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top, or perhaps in some pattern no one has yet imagined. Some believe the sentences run like standard writing. Others argue that the symbols must be read in reverse. A few bold thinkers propose that the text might flow vertically, climbing the page instead of crossing it. The manuscript, for its part, refuses to confirm any theory. It lies open with serene composure as scholars rotate it this way and that, turning it sideways, flipping it upside down, analyzing ink strokes under magnification, and debating passionately. Throughout all of this, the Codex remains perfectly unbothered, silent, patient, maybe even amused. Much like its more famous counterpart, the Voynich Manuscript, the Rohonc Codex has a strange sense of personality. Voynich feels like a gentle dream, full of botanical fantasies and celestial diagrams that drift in and out of logic. Rohonc, on the other hand, feels like a puzzle placed squarely on the table, accompanied by an unspoken disclaimer: you won't solve this, but you may try. Enjoy. The entire book radiates a quiet, subtle humor, the kind found in riddles, crafted not to frustrate but to entertain those who enjoy the slow meditation of the unknown. What deepens the mystery is the manuscript's complete resistance to classification. Linguists have tried to identify any resemblance to known writing systems, but the Codex does not cooperate. The symbols have no parallels in Indo-European languages, Uralic languages, Turkic languages, Semitic languages, African scripts, Asian scripts, or any indigenous systems. They belong to nothing but the Rohonc Codex itself. Some propose that the manuscript could represent a forgotten regional script, but the structure does not align with natural language patterns. Others suggest that the symbols are encoded versions of letters from a known alphabet, but no substitution method has yielded consistent, meaningful results. Every analytical attempt produces the same conclusion. It resembles language, but not quite. The spacing between symbols further deepens the confusion. Sometimes the characters gather in clusters that resemble words. Sometimes they stretch out like strings of code. Sometimes they seem to form paragraphs, but then shift unexpectedly into tight blocks or scattered formations. It is as though the book is imitating the outward appearance of writing while quietly refusing to follow any of its internal logic. And yet, despite all this mischief, the manuscript feels peaceful. It does not overwhelm. It does not shout for attention. It sits quietly, holding its secrets without urgency. Its silence is neither hostile nor cold. It is the silence of a book that has seen centuries pass, of a text that has watched scholars come and go, watched theories bloom and fall apart, watched new technologies emerge with great enthusiasm and examine it thoroughly, only to leave with a politely puzzled expression. There is a kind of gentle humor in this dynamic. One imagines the manuscript as a softly smiling guardian of mysteries, watching humans lean forward with their pens and magnifying glasses and digital scanners, whispering confidently, "We'll figure it out this time." And the manuscript, with all the patience in the world, simply lies open, offering the same unreadable lines, as though responding, "Feel free." Even the material of the Codex contributes to its enigmatic charm. The pages, made from a form of thick paper or parchment, have aged into a warm, soft tone, like the color of candlelight resting on cream fabric. The edges have darkened slightly over time, giving each leaf a gentle gradient that feels almost intentional. Holding or viewing the Codex evokes the sensation of touching history, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, grounding way, like handling an object that has never rushed for anyone. The ink, though faded, remains delicate and uniform. The strokes do not tremble. The lines do not show hesitation. Whoever created the manuscript had a steady hand and a mind committed to completing this project, whatever its purpose may have been. And despite all uncertainty surrounding the content, the craftsmanship radiates devotion. Some researchers have even suggested that the manuscript may have been created with an artistic or spiritual intention. Perhaps the symbols were meant to induce contemplation rather than communication. Perhaps the illustrations were meditative rather than informative. The book could have served as a ritual object, a symbolic text, a guide to ideas that no longer exist in the forms we understand. It may not have been meant to be read literally, but to be experienced visually, like a tapestry of symbols and scenes weaving together into something deeper than linear meaning. Whether intentionally or not, the Codex succeeds beautifully in creating this contemplative effect. Reading it, if the word reading can even be applied, becomes an act of drifting. The eyes scan the markings, tracing their curves and patterns, absorbing their quiet rhythm. Nothing resolves, but nothing needs to. The book provides the same peaceful ambiguity that one finds in watching waves, or firelight, or falling snow. Patterns with no answer, movement with no destination. Through all its mystery, the Rohonc Codex never feels threatening. It feels instead like a slow puzzle meant for gentle evenings, the kind one can ponder without pressure. It offers curiosity without chaos, complexity without urgency. In its own silent way, the manuscript invites the observer to slow down, breathe softly, and let the mind wander without expectation. It is a book that seems to understand something profound. Not all knowledge exists to be explained. Not all symbols exist to be named. Not all mysteries exist to be solved. Some exist simply to accompany the quiet. The Rohonc Codex has inspired a great many theories, each one shaped by a blend of hopeful imagination, scholarly persistence, and that quiet human desire to make sense of something stubbornly refusing to explain itself. Because no one can actually read the manuscript, the theories surrounding it drift across the academic world like soft, floating lanterns, each glowing gently with possibility, each casting a little circle of hopeful light and each eventually flickering into the same conclusion. Well, perhaps not. It is this gentle cycle of hope and humility that gives the manuscript its unique charm. Every theory begins boldly, almost romantically, and ends with the softest tap from reality. A reminder that the Codex, in all its dense symbols and tiny illustrations, is not a puzzle that will bend easily. It remains what it has always been, a quiet artifact from another time, a closed door that doesn't mind being knocked on but has no intention of opening. One of the oldest and most elegant theories is the idea that the Rohonc Codex is a multi-layered cipher designed to protect knowledge now lost. Scholars imagine a medieval or early modern scribe with extraordinary discipline, carefully constructing layers of encoded meaning, a cipher within a cipher within a cipher. The literary equivalent of locking something inside a chest, then placing the chest inside another chest, then burying both chests somewhere very inconvenient. If this theory is true, then the Codex may well be one of the greatest masterpieces of information security ever created. It would be a shield forged not from iron or stone, but from deliberate confusion. A tangle of symbols, arranged so cleverly that they have defeated centuries of analysis. Even the most powerful modern decryption tools, the ones capable of cracking military codes or reconstructing missing languages, have stared at the manuscript with impressive seriousness, only to return the linguistically equivalent shrug. We found patterns, we found structure, we did not find meaning. This theory paints a dramatic picture, one where scholars imagine a forgotten school of cipher makers dedicating themselves to protecting precious knowledge through the most complicated writing system conceivable. But reality taps the shoulder gently and asks, if someone created such a magnificent code, why is there no hint of similar encryption anywhere else? Why no teaching materials, no parallel documents, no references in letters or notes? The Codex answers none of this. It simply exists, calmly, politely, refusing to clarify whether it is a masterpiece of encryption or just a very, very persistent mystery. Another theory, equally poetic, suggests that the Codex is a copy of an older manuscript, a reproduction of a text belonging to a forgotten European civilization. According to this idea, the symbols represent a language that was already dying or extinct by the time the manuscript was created. In such a scenario, the book becomes a fragile echo, the last surviving witness of a culture whose other traces have long vanished. No ruins, no oral tradition, no records, nothing but a single silent text filled with symbols no one can name. If this is true, then the Codex becomes a relic of extraordinary sadness and beauty, a single pebble left behind from an entire shoreline washed away by the tides of history. Scholars sometimes describe the manuscript as though it were a message in a bottle, drifting through centuries without ever reaching the people who could understand it. The illustrations, tiny and careful, become even more haunting when viewed through this lens. The small armies, the rituals, the banners, the symbols floating above miniature heads, all of them might represent moments from a society whose worldview disappeared long before anyone thought to record it. The Codex might contain prayers, laws, myths, or chronicles, all written in a script meant for eyes that no longer exist. It is a beautiful theory, a soft, slightly melancholic myth wrapped in ink and parchment. But again, reality steps in gently and raises a hand. If this was truly a language of a lost European culture, why does not even a hint of the script appear anywhere else? Why no inscriptions, no graffiti, no fragments in ruins? Why only one book, sitting alone without siblings or ancestors? The Codex answers this by being entirely itself, complete, solitary, and inscrutable, like a guest who attends the party alone, remains mysterious the whole night, and departs without leaving a name. Then there is the most mischievous theory, the one delivered with an amused half-smile. The possibility that the Rohonc Codex is an elaborate 19th century hoax. According to this idea, someone with extraordinary patience and possibly extraordinary free time created hundreds of pages of invented symbols, carefully drawn tiny illustrations, and then quietly placed the manuscript into a collection to observe the reactions of future scholars. If this scenario is true, then the Codex becomes the world's most successful and long-lasting prank, an academic snowball that has been rolling downhill for nearly 2 centuries, gathering no solution but plenty of attention. One imagines the prankster with ink-stained fingers, sitting at a desk late at night, suppressing laughter while drawing yet another line of perplexing symbols, whispering, "Oh, they'll love this one." And indeed, if this were a hoax, it has worked incredibly well. Scholars have debated passionately. Researchers have built entire careers around it. Digital tools have been pointed at it. Conferences have discussed it. Articles have been written. And in all that time, the Codex has remained serenely ambiguous, offering no hint that it might simply be laughing quietly at everyone. But again, reality enters softly, not to scold, but simply to question. Would someone truly dedicate years of their life to creating such an elaborate manuscript with so many pages, so much consistency, and such tiny detailed drawings? And if so, why? Why no confession? Why no record? Why no creator's notes, hidden somewhere in the margins saying, "Just kidding"? The Codex provides no answers. Its silence is perfect, neither confirming nor denying, simply resting in the exact center of possibility. Other minor theories flutter around the manuscript like quiet moths around candlelight. Some suggest the codex might be a meditation tool, a collection of symbols meant to induce contemplation rather than communication. Others propose it could be a spiritual manual written in ritual code designed only for initiates. Still others imagine it as an artistic exercise, a work created not to convey meaning, but to explore patterns and visual rhythm. All the theories are gentle in their own ways, carrying small hopes like seeds drifting on the wind. Each offers a way to interpret the manuscript's stubborn silence. Each brings a new lens through which to view the symbols, and each eventually reaches the same peaceful pause where certainty evaporates and the codex resumes its quiet presence, unperturbed. No matter which theory one leans toward, the manuscript emits a single, unmistakable feeling. It carries the glow of a memory, the softness of something ancient that has forgotten how to speak, but still remembers how to exist. It feels less like a message waiting to be decoded and more like a relic, content to be witnessed. A small fragment of old Europe, resting in a space between history and dreaming. The Codex does not hurry anyone. It does not demand interpretation. It does not ask to be solved. It only asks to be opened, looked at, and allowed to breathe its quiet symbols into the room. The longer one stares, the more the symbols feel like distant stars, recognizable in their repetition, familiar in their patterns, yet unknowable in their meaning. There is a serenity in this unknowing, a kind of honesty, a reminder that not all things surrender their secrets and that sometimes the beauty lies precisely in the fact that they do not. The Rohonc Codex feels like a whisper from a distant century, asking nothing, promising nothing, but offering instead a gentle companionship, a soft presence in the dim light, a fragment of the past that simply sits and allows itself to be seen. And if it is never decoded, if no theory ever becomes more than a hopeful candle in the dark, the Codex will still remain what it always has been, a quiet memory, a drifting shadow of old Europe, and a book that smiles softly at everyone who tries to understand it. Throughout the vast reaches of ancient history, there are scripts, letters, and symbols that drift toward us like faint echoes carried across centuries of silence. They do not arrive with certainty. They do not declare their purpose. Instead, they settle softly into the hands of archaeologists, historians, and the simply curious, as if emerging from the deep folds of time with a shrug, saying, "This is all that's left. Do what you will with it." These remnants feel less like records and more like quiet ghosts of civilizations that once shaped the world, only to dissolve into dust long before anyone thought to ask their stories. One of the most enduring examples is Linear A, the script of the ancient Minoan civilization. Over 3,500 years old, it remains unreadable to this day, standing as politely as possible while resisting every human attempt to interpret it. The symbols carved into clay tablets look remarkably intentional. The lines are straight. The spacing seems deliberate. The repeated shapes seem to hint at grammar, patterns, and structure. But like a shop sign from a store that collapsed 3 millennia ago, the meaning behind each symbol is gone, swallowed by time. Looking at those tablets is oddly soothing. The symbols don't demand understanding. They simply exist. Some characters resemble simplified animals, others abstract forms, and others look like they might have been letters, at least to the people who once used them. Today they feel like a puzzle, missing half its pieces, but somehow still beautiful in its incompleteness. Scholars can analyze stroke angles, clay textures, and repeating clusters, but the tablets remain unfazed. Whatever linear A may have meant to the Minoans, laws, inventories, myths, scheduling notes for when to feed the palace goats, it now rests in a comfortable, eternal ambiguity. And alongside the mysterious tablets of linear A, the world is filled with alchemy manuscripts, those thin, trembling sheets of parchment decorated with handwriting dense enough to make even modern readers sit back and exhale. These manuscripts come from a time when alchemists believed metals could be coaxed, persuaded, or bullied into transforming into something else. Most famously, gold. Their notes mix diagrams of impossible furnaces, spiraling arrows pointing from one symbol to another, cubes balanced on spheres, and handwritten commentary that occasionally seems coherent before suddenly dissolving back into cryptic poetry. If a person unfamiliar with alchemy flipped through these pages today, they might assume that the author was trying to write while being gently shaken. Entire paragraphs curve slightly upward, as though they were following a whim. Symbols appear that could represent Mercury or iron, or possibly Wednesday. Some manuscripts contain drawings of eyes, but they might also be spoons, or maybe astrological diagrams, or maybe just eyes. The ambiguity is part of their charm. What makes alchemical manuscripts especially amusing is how intentionally confusing they seem. Many alchemists encoded their work on purpose, hoping to protect their secrets from untrained readers. The result is an entire genre of writing that feels like an elaborate inside joke shared across centuries. It leaves modern researchers squinting at symbols and wondering, with a gentle sigh, whether the document ever meant anything precise, or whether the writer simply enjoyed the thrill of organized chaos. Far to the south in the sands of Egypt, fragments of leather manuscripts have been discovered in the shadowed pockets of caves. These pieces of ancient writing are delicate, as thin as old bark, and softened by the persistent breath of the desert. Over thousands of years, the wind has brushed against them, as if trying to smooth the edges of the past. The symbols inscribed upon them curve and twist, forming loops that look like the remnants of a language that once flowed confidently from the hands of its writers. Some inscriptions swirl like water rushing along a dried riverbed. Others appear like tangled vines, interconnected, organic, and faintly alive. These manuscripts might have been maps, though to what destination nobody knows. They might have been instructions, lists, myths, or personal letters. When viewed today, they feel like tiny bridges connecting us to people who once lived, breathed, worried, celebrated, and then vanished into the sands, long before we began wondering who they were. Some fragments seem to depict directions, though it's equally possible that they were notes left by someone who forgot what day the market was open. Others appear ceremonial, though the rituals they describe have been erased by time. What remains are shapes without voices, signs of intention without explanation. And then there are the Anatolian stone inscriptions, which carry their own layered complexity. These stones, scattered across ruins and ancient sites, have been written on not once but many times across generations. One layer of text sits faintly beneath another. Some carvings appear bold, fresh, carved with sharp tools. Others lie beneath like soft shadows, nearly erased by the centuries. Together they create a palimpsest, of the human desire to mark time, to leave something behind, even if the next generation might erase it, carve over it, or repurpose the stone entirely. The effect is mesmerizing. One can trace a faint line from 2,500 years ago only to see it intersect with another carved centuries later. It's like witnessing conversations across time, different voices carving into the same surface, separated by lifetimes, yet sharing the same stone. Some symbols seem official, others look spontaneous. A few resemble casual doodles, as if someone waiting for a friend decided to practice their carving skills on a public monument. The stone remains patient through all of it, layer after layer of intention, gradually merging into a tapestry of time. What ties all these lost scripts and inscriptions together is their incomplete state. None of them arrive in our hands fully formed. None come with introductions or translations or explanations. They arrive broken, faded, partial. They lack beginnings and endings. They offer only the middle, the part that time forgot to erase. And that middle is often the most mysterious part of all. Perhaps the most soothing aspect of these ancient scripts is the way they embrace silence. They refuse to hurry, they refuse to clarify, they make no demands. Instead, they sit across centuries with the quiet confidence of things that no longer need to justify themselves. They are not puzzles waiting impatiently for solutions. They are remnants, drifting through time with the same soft rhythm as dust carried by the wind. When one looks at them long enough, the symbols stop insisting on meaning and instead begin to feel like gentle reminders that civilizations are fragile, that memory fades, that knowledge can slip through fingers no matter how tightly we hold it, that everything humans write is only temporarily understood, and that sometimes the traces we leave behind become mysteries even to those who come after us. The world often looks at these ancient inscriptions with a mix of reverence and longing. There's a desire to decode them, to reconstruct the lost stories, to resurrect the civilizations that breathed life into these symbols. And yet there's comfort in accepting that some things remain unknowable. Some voices are meant to echo, not speak. Some histories are meant to be sensed, not explained. Linear A may never whisper its truths. Alchemy manuscripts may never reveal whether the symbols actually mean anything coherent. Egyptian leather fragments may forever remain notes without beginnings. Anatolian stones may always carry layered, overlapping murmurs, and still they are beautiful. Still they feel alive. Still they drift gently through time, settling in the hands of anyone willing to pause long enough to listen. These ancient writings, broken, incomplete, unreadable, remind us that history does not always need to be whole to be meaningful. Sometimes a fragment is enough. Sometimes a faint echo is all we need to imagine the voices behind it. And sometimes the mystery itself is the point, a quiet invitation to slow down, breathe, and let the unknown simply exist alongside us. Not as a challenge, not as a riddle, but as a piece of the world that survived long enough to say, in its soft, silent way, I was here. I mattered. And even if you never understand me, I remain. And as these ancient scripts drift softly into silence, something else becomes clearer. Knowledge does not always disappear with sound. Sometimes, when the voice of a civilization fades, the warmth of its thoughts lingers behind in quieter forms, carved lines on stone, dim patterns on walls, scratches left where someone once stood with a tool and a purpose. Long after the languages vanish, long after the communities disappear into the folds of time, the marks they made remain, like the shape of a memory still visible, even when the memory itself has fallen asleep. In caves across different continents, tiny inscriptions carved into rock sit waiting under layers of dust and darkness. They are not grand carvings. They do not boast or decorate. They are small messages made by hands that no longer exist. The lines are not sharp like ink on fresh parchment. They are blunt, uneven, shaped by stone tools and dim lighting. But they feel strikingly intimate, as if the people who carved them had paused for a moment, leaned close to the wall, and whispered something into the earth. Something important, perhaps. Something they hoped would survive. One inscription in a cave might curve like a half-forgotten symbol. Another might be a short line, a tally, a mark made to remember a number or a day or a ritual. They could be announcements or warnings or maps or simple conversations between humans and stone. What they meant is lost, but the gesture survives. And in that gesture lies a quiet warmth, the warmth of someone who tried to leave something behind. The dim light that falls across these ancient grooves often makes them appear to breathe. Shadows fill the carved spaces, settle into the grooves, and lift again as the light shifts. The effect is subtle, like watching the outline of a sleeping creature exhale slowly. The symbols come alive not through meaning, but through presence. They say nothing, yet they convey everything. That someone stood here. Someone cared enough to carve. Someone hoped to be understood by a future that would never fully come. This gentle presence is part of why these remnants are so soothing. They do not demand interpretation. They simply offer themselves as faint traces of the past. They hold no urgency, no insistence. They wait quietly, like the dried leaves that sometimes slip out from old books. Fragile, weightless, carrying the shape of a season long gone. You pick them up, knowing you cannot reconstruct the whole tree or the entire forest from that single leaf, and yet the leaf still feels meaningful simply because it reached you. The pacing of these relics is slow, unhurried, like footsteps moving through a dark cave, steady and careful. They reveal themselves at the pace of someone taking their time in the quiet. The symbols do not press for attention. They do not flash or glow or reorganize themselves to be more readable. They remain exactly as they are, inviting a soft contemplation rather than an intellectual wrestling match. In this low meditative rhythm, the symbols become perfect companions for silence. They are like the faint hum of wind gliding across stone at night, or the soft brush of air inside a cavern. They do not try to fill the silence. They accompany it. They settle into it. They help shape the silence into something comforting rather than empty, because when knowledge loses its voice, it also loses its ability to overwhelm. What remains is gentle, simple, stripped of its urgency. These unreadable marks, these resilient fragments, offer the kind of calm that comes from recognizing that not everything must be understood for its existence to matter. Some scholars believe that these carvings were once messages to the future, signals, instructions, coded hints, or traditions meant to be passed forward. If so, the irony is soft and slightly humorous. The future arrived, but the messages did not. Time stretched too far, weather wore down too much, and the world changed too quickly. Whatever those inscriptions once hoped to communicate is now wrapped in fog, so thick that unraveling it would require more patience than curiosity usually allows. And yet these remnants do not seem troubled by this. They rest quietly in their caves, content with their place. They do not complain that no one can read them anymore. They do not mourn the loss of their clarity. They remain steady and unbothered, offering their presence rather than their explanation. This is perhaps the most touching thing about forgotten knowledge. It becomes a kind of silence that does not judge. It accepts that humans move quickly, that eras end without warning, that the world changes shape again and again. The inscriptions fade, but they do not hold grudges. They merely lie there, surrounded by the slow architecture of stone, waiting for anyone who might happen to look closely enough to notice them. In this silence, something remarkable happens. Without meaning to, these old carvings begin to speak in a different way. They speak through absence, through shape, through the fact of their survival, through the faint warmth of the gesture that created them. They remind us that behind every symbol, no matter how illegible, there was once a hand, a breath, a life. And so these unreadable marks become part of the quiet chapter of human history where knowledge continues to exist, even without language. They are like footprints left behind in soft earth, long after the traveler has disappeared. You cannot follow the path. You cannot know where the person was going. But the sight of the footprints still tells you that someone passed through. Someone lived in this world. Someone had a purpose. Knowledge that loses its voice does not vanish. It simply transforms. It becomes texture instead of text, warmth instead of explanation, a soft remainder rather than a sharp message. These transformations give old relics a kind of poetry. Not the loud kind, not the kind with rhyme or structure, but a quiet poetry that rests in the space between knowing and not knowing. Look long enough, and even the tiny grooves on the stone walls seem to hum faintly, shaped by ancient rhythm. They don't provide facts. They provide atmosphere. They don't carry stories. They carry presence. And sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes the soft outline of a thought is more soothing than its full meaning. Some imagine that these inscriptions were meant for someone precise, a future leader, a member of a tribe, an inheritor of a tradition. Others imagine that they were meant for no one in particular, just the earth itself. Maybe the people who carved them weren't recording anything monumental. Maybe they were simply marking a moment, the way someone today might scratch initials into the bark of a tree or leave a trace on a wall simply to say, "I was here." Regardless of intention, the result is the same. The mark remains long after the meaning dissolves. And what survives is the quiet warmth, the faint breath of someone who once took the time to carve into stone. In this way, lost knowledge becomes part of the silent architecture of history. Not through the words it once contained, but through its endurance, through its refusal to vanish entirely, through its willingness to linger as a soft outline, waiting for anyone who wishes to pause and sit beside it. And when one finally steps back from these carvings, whether viewed in a cave, a ruin, or a museum, there is a sense of calm that settles in. A sense that the past is not gone, only quieter. A sense that every hand that carved these symbols left behind a small warmth that time could not erase. Even when knowledge loses its voice, its presence remains. Light as dust, soft as breath, gentle as a handprint left on stone. In the ancient world, long before electric lights hummed through cities and long before information could travel from one hemisphere to the other with the tap of a fingertip, knowledge moved slowly. It traveled on foot, or by horseback, or by the unhurried turning of seasons, and because it moved slowly, it was precious. Knowledge was not simply information, it was survival, advantage, and sometimes the delicate thread that held an entire community together. People understood this deeply. They treated knowledge the way one might treat a glowing ember in the cold, protected, concealed, and shared only with great care. If a village had mastered the art of turning certain plants into remedies, that knowledge wasn't carved onto public walls. If a kingdom discovered a technique for forging unusually strong metal, that knowledge wasn't sung in the marketplace. Instead, people tucked their wisdom into layers of symbols, metaphors, and hidden diagrams, like placing a valuable jewel into nested boxes, each smaller and more intricate than the last. In times of war, having a secret method to strengthen armor or sharpen weapons could decide whether a kingdom thrived or vanished. The formulas for metals were whispered from master to apprentice, never written plainly. Instructions might appear as symbols, inside symbols, or encoded lists that only made sense to someone who already knew the trick of reading them. One page might show a sequence of marks resembling tiny footprints, but only the initiated would understand that each footprint represented a specific mixture of minerals and fire. The world of healing was no different. Remedies created from rare herbs, dangerous roots, and complicated rituals were guarded carefully. In some communities, healers drew their notes with diagrams that looked a little like plants and a little like dream fragments, curving stems, swirling roots, cryptic shapes that made sense only to those taught to interpret them. To the untrained eye, these diagrams might look like early attempts at abstract art. To the trained healer, they were life-saving instructions. Even the skies held secrets worth protecting. Astronomical knowledge when the rains might arrive, when the sea might shift, when a long drought might end, was among the most valuable knowledge a community could possess. The cycles of the stars guided planting, harvesting, navigation, and ritual, but the patterns were not written plainly. Instead, ancient astronomers encoded their observations in circular diagrams, in spirals that represented time, in symbols that mapped the sky with deliberate obscurity. These diagrams resembled the plans of someone trying to organize the heavens onto parchment without letting outsiders borrow the blueprint. In all of this, encryption became not merely a technique, but a quiet philosophy. It was a natural extension of how people viewed the world, that precious things must be shielded, that wisdom must be given only to those ready to carry it. A formula for metal could empower a kingdom. A healing ritual could protect a village. A celestial chart could keep sailors alive on stormy waters. And because these things mattered so much, people hid them under layers of signs that seemed random from the outside, but were perfectly logical from within. If an enemy obtained the knowledge too easily, a dynasty might falter. If someone reckless acquired a dangerous remedy, they might do more harm than good. If celestial knowledge became widespread, rival tribes could predict the same tides, the same storms, the same moments of abundance. And so secrecy became a gentle shield, one that slowed down the spread of knowledge, not to hoard it selfishly, but to protect it from misuse. The idea of writing plainly would have sounded almost irresponsible in some ancient circles. Instead of jotting down, add 3 parts of leaf A and 2 parts of root B, the healer might draw a symbol that resembled a branch curling around a star. The apprentice, trained in the symbolic language, would interpret the curve of the branch as a measurement, the star as a specific plant, and the distance between them as the timing. It was elegant in its own way, quiet, layered, meant only for those who knew how to listen. And while these encoded texts often look complicated today, they served a simple function then. They slowed knowledge down. They made it move gently, gradually, from teacher to student, from one generation to the next. Instead of spreading wildly into hands that weren't ready, knowledge drifted like a leaf carried by a small stream. It arrived softly, deliberately, without the chaos of being misunderstood or misused. Even now, when archaeologists uncover such manuscripts, those with strange symbols, mysterious diagrams, or phrases that seem more like riddles than instructions, they often sense this intentional slowness. These writings were not trying to be dramatic or enigmatic. They were simply doing their job, keeping wisdom safe until the right person came along. There is something almost humorous about imagining a scribe sitting in a dim room centuries ago, carefully drawing a symbol that would later baffle historians for decades. A symbol that may have meant something as practical as heat gently until the mixture turns silver. But for the scribe, there was no intention to confuse future generations. They were simply following tradition, encoding knowledge the way one wraps a fragile object in many layers, not out of secrecy alone, but out of respect. And so, when we look at these ancient encrypted texts today, we are not just looking at secrets. We are looking at care. We are looking at caution shaped into symbols. We are looking at the protective instinct of a world where knowledge was not infinite, not replaceable, not easily shared. Knowledge was alive. Knowledge was vulnerable. Knowledge was power. And power, true power, always needed to be handled gently. Thus, these ancient codes drift into the present carrying not only mystery but warmth. Beneath the cryptic curves and tangled symbols lies the quiet heartbeat of people who wanted their wisdom to survive, but also wanted it to be safe. Every hidden instruction, every encoded recipe, every encrypted chart is a whisper from someone long gone. Here is something precious. I preserved it carefully. If you are the right one to understand it, you will. And so, across centuries of silence, knowledge remains, not erased, not lost, but simply moving slowly, as it always has, wrapped in the soft layers of symbols that once protected it. And yet, even with all the secrecy in the ancient world, there was another layer beneath it, one quieter and more deliberate, shaped not merely by protection, but by intention. Many traditions, orders, and early intellectual groups believed that knowledge should not simply be preserved. It should be guided. It should fall into the hands of those who understood its weight, who carried the discipline to use it wisely, and who possessed the temperament to avoid turning wisdom into harm. In those circles, knowledge was not just power, it was responsibility. And responsibility, they believed, needed the right air. So, secret writing evolved not only as a shield, but as a gatekeeper. A soft one, a quiet one, but a gatekeeper nonetheless. Across different regions, these groups created symbolic systems meant only for those inside the house, so to speak. Some shaped writing into strange, beautiful variants of familiar scripts, like letters wearing masks at a quiet masquerade, recognizable yet transformed. Others leaned into metaphor, drawings that seemed decorative but conveyed instructions or diagrams that encoded philosophical principles, the way constellations encode stories. Elsewhere, symbols were rooted in astronomy, mathematics, or ritual geometry, codes built from angles, stars, seasons, and numbers, woven together in ways that required both study and patience to understand. Every civilization had at least one branch of this hidden knowledge. It wasn't always dramatic. Much of it was gentle, thoughtful, slow. And to those entrusted with it, these systems were less about secrecy and more about cultivation. Because these societies believed that if knowledge was given too easily, it might be carried carelessly. Someone who arrived at wisdom without the perseverance to earn it might treat it lightly. But someone who labored through coded lines, who learned symbols step by step, who deciphered meaning gently and with dedication, that person would hold the knowledge with respect. The code was not an obstacle, it was a teacher. In that way, the encoded manuscripts of the ancient world functioned like softly closed doors, never locked, never hostile, but not wide open either. They waited in the middle ground. They waited for someone whose footsteps were slow and steady, someone who approached not out of impatience, but out of genuine curiosity and readiness. A hurried mind would skim the first page and frown. A reckless mind might declare the whole manuscript nonsense. But a patient mind, the kind that lingers, that observes, that breathes with the rhythm of the symbols, would eventually begin to see patterns, meaning intention. Somewhere between those lines, the manuscript would reveal itself. To many ancient scribes, this was the ideal, not a barrier, but a filter, a gentle invitation that only the right kind of reader would hear. One can imagine a young apprentice entering one of these places of learning, a dim chamber, a quiet hall, a stone courtyard under filtered light. The master hands them a text filled with swirling signs, sideways numbers, or spirals that seem to fold in on themselves. The apprentice blinks. The master smiles. And the lesson begins, not in deciphering the symbols, but in learning the patience required to let the symbols speak eventually. In some traditions, students spent years simply learning how to look at the pages, not to panic, not to rush, to breathe with the script, to treat each symbol as a small doorway and not an obstacle. And slowly, as their eyes adjusted, as their mind softened into rhythm, meaning would rise like mist from a still pond. These manuscripts were like seeds, small, unassuming, and inert unless placed in the right conditions. A hurried hand could scatter a seed onto stone. Nothing would grow. But a gentle hand could place that same seed into soft soil, water it, protect it, and watch as something beautiful emerged. The codes were never meant to be impenetrable. They simply needed the right soil. That is why ancient encoded texts feel so different from modern encryption. Today, encryption locks things away behind passwords, algorithms, and digital guardians. But ancient encryption was more like a whisper, a quiet suggestion, a soft curtain that one might brush aside if one chose to approach with the right intention. It was not designed to keep everyone out. It was designed to welcome the right person in. Some of the most revered manuscripts were written in scripts that seemed unreadable by design, but only to outsiders. To those within the tradition, the shapes carried memories, rituals, and entire worlds of meaning. A curved symbol might represent a season. A set of dots might represent a philosophical principle. A combination of strokes might convey not words but a sequence of actions, a ritual, or a way of thinking. To the modern viewer, these manuscripts look cryptic. To the ancient reader, they were alive. When those traditions faded, the manuscripts lost their voice, but they kept their warmth because the intention behind them still lingers. The codes still sit like gently closed doors, patient and unhurried, waiting. Not necessarily to be solved. Sometimes waiting is their whole purpose. A quiet reminder that some knowledge grows slowly. Even now, when researchers find these coded works, they feel something unusual, a calm, subtle presence, as though the text itself remembers what it was meant for. The manuscripts do not push to be decoded. They do not shout for translation. They simply rest in their state of quiet invitation. Anyone may enter, but only if they understand that walking slowly is part of the journey. And there is something beautiful in that. A kind of humility shaped into ink. A legacy that says, wisdom is not something you grab. It is something you grow into. When one reads these manuscripts with a modern mind, fast, restless, accustomed to rapid answers, one might miss the original rhythm entirely. But read with the pace of the past, read with the breath of someone who knows how to sit with silence, and the pages begin to feel different. Not louder, not clearer, but warmer. Like a room with a single candle left burning. A faint glow that exists simply to accompany whoever enters. That is the quiet gift of ancient codes. They remind us that the most meaningful knowledge rarely arrives in a rush. It arrives slowly, with patience, with discipline, and with respect. It arrives when the student is ready, not when the question is asked. It arrives when the mind has softened enough to listen. The manuscripts do not guard their secrets out of pride. They guard them because not everything precious belongs to every hand at every moment. Some truths blossom only when the world is quiet enough to receive them. And so the codes wait, still, across centuries. Doors made not of barriers, but of timing. They open softly, gently, just wide enough for the right footsteps to pass through.